Peter Carl, can we just start by establishing a couple of facts? Do we know how many British citizens are still in Lebanon who need to get out?
Well, we're providing 3 flights already left. Another one will be leaving today. But there isn't demand for more at the moment, but we're on standby if more people do need them. So that's the key facts. The consulate services have been outstanding. The British government has been prepared. And as I say, we have more flights on standby should we need them.
Both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have called for a ceasefire. Neither the Israelis nor Hezbollah seem to have paid the slightest bit of attention. What's the plan B?
Well, the Prime Minister was the first G7 leader who came out calling for a ceasefire and restraint. But we have to work in synchrony with our international allies. The US President is also calling for a ceasefire now and is calling for restraint. We can only have some influence, as we've seen in the past, when an international community comes together and works together. Now, we know that at the moment that we can advise, we can't dictate to either side in this conflict, but what we are doing is speaking as one united set of allies in the G7, calling for restraint and a move towards a political settlement. We know there's been precedent in the past for this situation. We need to get back to that same framework whereby there is disarmament in Lebanon, but also there is withdrawal and restraint from Israel.
So far, nobody's paid much attention, even though we are allies. But our principal ally in the region, or here in this particular conflict, is, of course, Israel. And we presumably are talking to them. Are we advising the Israelis not to hit targets inside Iran?
So at the moment, yes, of course, the Prime Minister has spoken to Prime Minister Netanyahu. But also we are coordinating quite tightly with our international allies as well. We are asking for restraint. What we can't do...
But nobody's actually paying any attention, are they?
Well, Israel is a sovereign state. Israel has the right to defend itself. This latest conflict was escalated by Iran sending bombs and missiles into Israel. So it has complicated an already complicated situation even more. That's why we have to use as much diplomacy as we can to call for restraint. But look, Israel is a sovereign state. We can advise as allies. What we can't do is dictate. And that is the situation that we're in, and we are advising restraint. We are using all the influence we do have, which is diplomatic. Now, of course, Israel is acting stridently. We want to make sure that there is as much restraint as possible and a move to a political, diplomatic solution, because that is the only way this entire conflict is going to come to an end ultimately.
You use the word stridently. That's an interesting word. Mr. Netanyahu has been pretty unequivocal that he plans to do whatever is necessary, he thinks, to meet his war aims. What will the UK's position be if Mr. Netanyahu decides that he does want to strike inside Iran?
I'm not in the business of predicting the future. And talking on hypotheticals at this moment. We are the British government.
Well, it's not that hypothetical. He's been pretty clear. He told Mr. Macron where to get off yesterday.
We are advising restraint. The Prime Minister has spoken to Mr. Netanyahu. What he would have said in that conversation is pretty obvious, because publicly we are calling for de-escalation. So it is clear what the British position is. It is clear what we are advising Israel, and it is clear what we're doing as an international community, because the Prime Minister has spoken to President Biden in recent days. He's spoken to President Macron in recent days. We're trying our best as an international community to urge restraint, urge a movement towards a political settlement, because this is the only way that this complex and deepening war is going to end.
The Israeli government and the Israeli people are not the same thing, and our position as a country, I think, is that we are supportive of the Israeli people. Does the Prime Minister accept that there may come a point at which the interests of the Israeli people are no longer being served by the Israeli government?
Our job right now is to work with the Israeli government to bring as much influence as we can in lockstep with our international partners to urge restraint and a movement to a political settlement.
Have we set out some red lines for Mr. Netanyahu?
What we have said is quite public, because I think you can call it a red line, you can call it urging. We are doing everything we can, using normal political lines and diplomatic lines to bring this solution, bring this conflict to an end using diplomatic means. Now, of course, when Iran starts sending missiles into Israel, of course, that is going to lead to a provocation that makes it more difficult to move towards a diplomatic and a negotiated settlement. But we have to get there, and we're using all of the diplomacy we can, because Britain alone can't do it. But we've seen in the past, since the appalling attacks of October 7th last year, we've seen since then that the only time there's been movement towards restraint has come when the international community stands together, and we're doing all we can to do so.
We talked about the geopolitics of this, but this conflict has come home, hasn't it? How worried is the government about the impact of all this at home? I see the Prime Minister's written in a newspaper this morning about vile hatred, I think he called it. And it's interesting. Have a look at these numbers. These are the numbers reported by the Community Security Trust, anti-Semitic incidents reported every month. And we obviously saw a spike a year ago. It's tailed off, but the level, month by month, is still higher than it was in previous times. How concerned is the government?
We are concerned. And as the Prime Minister has said repeatedly, that we need to work to end this conflict, because when conflict emerges in the Middle East, we see how it impacts communities around the world. You know, the divisions that are being expressed in the Middle East are divisions which sometimes emerge in other countries as well, and here in the UK. And we're really worried about that. Anti-Semitic attacks have risen, and it is appalling. You know, we have worked assiduously as a government to work with law enforcement to make sure, and beyond, to make sure that we tackle anti-Semitism at its roots. That is our guiding mission in this case. We've learnt a lot as a Labour Party about these issues, and we're trying as hard as we can to make sure that we tackle anti-Semitism and other kinds of bigotry and hatred at its absolute roots. And you saw just yesterday an absolutely strident statement from the Home Secretary, making sure that when there are hateful messages that come onto our streets, that the law enforcement agencies have the full support of this government and the Home Secretary and Prime Minister in order to do what they need to do to keep our streets safe.
So do you think somebody who carries a sign on a demonstration saying, "I love Hezbollah," should be prosecuted?
Somebody who carries that sign is committing a criminal act. And the law enforcement agencies have the full support of the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister and this government in doing what they need to do to make sure that criminal acts like that are tackled.
Rachel Reeves will bring us her budget at the end of October. I think you and she this morning would like us to be talking about the investment in green industries and so on. Obviously, there are other priorities right now, but let me just ask you about that. She keeps telling us that you're already £22 billion in the hole. You want to invest. Whose money are you going to spend?
Well, we have money to spend. I mean, government does have money to spend. It's how you actually invest. And this is the negotiations.
So why are you bothered about 22 billion if you've got this money?
Well, because what you have to do is two simultaneous things. We have to fix the damage that was inherited by the previous government, that awful £22 billion black hole. But we also need to get the economy growing. Now, if you look at my department, for example, you know, I've had to go through and reprioritise. So we are investing in the technology of the future, but by doing so wisely, you can attract private sector investment as well. And this is the incredible thing that we're trying to do at the moment, this balancing act. So just take a couple of weeks ago when Amazon said that they were going to invest £8 billion into the British economy, £8 billion. They did that because we have performed the regulatory changes. We have adapted planning reforms, the kind of things that are unlocking investment. So there are things government can do that bring investment in. And the most basic of all is ending the chaos and instability we had before, having a stable government that's doing the reforms needed to our economy that attract investment. So you can do these two things together, and it's not one thing or another.
Let's talk about stable government. You know, you want people to be talking about investment, but they aren't. What they're talking about is suits. And one of the reasons that you can't get past what people call freebie gate is that the government itself doesn't seem to be very clear. Prime Minister says he's not going to take any more wardrobe money, but he doesn't seem to be too bothered about free tickets to Arsenal or club nights in Ibiza. What is actually the guidance here? Are you guys not taking these offers, or are you?
Well, the first thing to say is that none of the rules were broken. We tried really...
No, I'm not asking about
let me just explain, because we tried so hard while we had a previous set of leaders of our country, a previous government that were just flouting the rules, breaking the rules and lowering the standards. Look, it's important. We focused so much on the rules that what we didn't do, and we now know we have to do, is take what the public are thinking about what happens within the rules. This is something that we didn't quite see at the time. So what we're trying to do is adapt to what is the expectations, because expectations of this Labour government are so much higher than they were of the previous government for understandable reasons. And we're trying to meet the expectations that the public have. Now,
no, you're trying to meet the expectations you yourself set, because you couldn't stop criticising the other lot for every transgression.
No. The point, Trevor, we've criticised them for breaking the rules. I'm really asking you. We've criticised them for breaking the rules. Priti Patel broke the ministerial code, had no consequence. Boris Johnson spent tens of thousands of pounds on wallpaper, never said where the money was coming from, and tried to hide it. You know, these things were not declared. You know, so what we're trying to do... What you're doing is what you guys always do, take us back to the terrible Tories. I just asked you, what is the position for ministers about accepting free football tickets or club nights in Ibiza? Is it on or is it off? Everything is declared. And we will.
So it's okay.
Everything is declared. We will stick to the rules. What Keir Starmer has done is he's repaid the articles that have happened since the election, and we're also working on a new set of rules, because there's a separate set of rules at the moment for people who are government ministers from MPs. So we're updating the rules so that it reflects the expectations that we believe the public have post-election. OK, unfortunately, we will no doubt be talking about this for many weeks to come. But just very quickly, one last question. Chagos Island. Is the government planning to give away any other British territories, Falkland Islands, Gibraltar, for example? No and no. This was a negotiation that's been going on for some time. There's been 13 rounds of negotiations. 11 rounds of those negotiations happened under the Tories, a lot of them with James Cleverly leading from the Foreign Office. This is a good deal. The entire text has not been published yet, and I urge people to wait for that text, because the text protects Britain's right to have a military base there. It has been endorsed by America, so of course the Chinese concerns that have been raised by some of the leadership elections irresponsibly simply aren't there anything, and we are taking care and making sure that those people who have been unfairly treated, who were residents on the island before, will have the justice that they deserve and the right to return. This is a win-win negotiated by this government. The previous government clearly couldn't get it across the line in the interests of the country and in the interests of the region.